Good morning, everyone. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of Acts of 2023, on March 29th, 2023, Governor Maura Healey signed into law an act making appropriations for the fiscal year 2023 to provide for supplementing certain existing appropriations and for certain other activities and projects. This act includes an extension until March 31st, 2025 of the remote meeting provisions. This meeting of the Long Range Financial Planning Committee is being conducted by remote means. We are recording for future viewing for anyone who desires. And I'm going to do a quick roll call vote. Or not vote, just a roll call. Let's see here. Let me just pull up the list so that I can go in order. Julianne Bride.
Here.
Nancy Hyde.
Here.
Nancy James.
Here.
Melissa McDonough, you said is not going to be attending. Paul McLaughlin.
Here.
Chris Paff.
Here.
Maya Plotkin.
Here.
Phil Shapiro.
Here.
Dan Weller.
Here.
Skip Wells. You had not heard back from him, right? And then Paul Tusseri said he could not make it. Excellent. So that is all of the appointed members. We're also joined by a number of our ex officio members as well. And I'm going to start with the chair's update. I just want to give an update coming out of last night's select board meeting. The select board took our collective recommendation regarding the facility study and voted to use $500,000 from the ARPA study, the ARPA money, to fund the study. So that is good news so that things can move forward to help us in, our long range planning. Oh, what happened there? So that was number one. Number two, we also approved the use of $1.4 million in the unrestricted ARPA funds to be allocated towards the design and bid documents for Firehouse 1, contingent on passage of the balance at the special town meeting coming up in January. So those are sort of the two updates out of last night's select board meeting. There was a third piece, and Stephanie McManus did an outstanding job presenting a financial update. And one of the things that she covered off was one of the very first questions that we asked when we got together was just getting an overview of what our debt commitment and capacity is. And so I'd like her to take this group through a little bit of an abbreviated version of last night's presentation, because there were a number of slides at the end that I think really help illustrate where we are, and it will be helpful when we get the studies back for us to have further long range communication and consideration. So with that, I'm going to ask Stephanie to pop on, share her screen, and give you all a taste of what we looked at last night.
Great. And Rob, if I'm going into too much detail, you want me to skip ahead, just let me know, okay?
Certainly. Thank you.
So I'm not going to bore you with everything we went over last night, but the main focus of the whole presentation was the town's financial policies. The select board passed those. The last update was in 2022. And I had gone over really focusing on the update on our current reserve funds and the balances in those and the policies behind those, and then went into detail on debt. So I'm going to sort of skip through, if that's okay, Rob, all the reserves. I don't think we need to go through unless you want me to, the free cash and stabilization funds. I'm happy to, or I can.
I think you maybe touch on the free cash piece of it. Yep. Because that plays into what we just talked about with respect to Fire Station 1.
Of course. Yep. So I sort of gave background, and I had presented this to the select board a couple of months ago that the town's free cash was certified on July 1st at just under $11 million, which is a higher than usual level. There was some factors that went into that I've gone over before, just such as elevated reserves due to borrowing for the elementary school, and then higher than normal interest rates. So we had investment income a little bit higher than usual, as well as not utilizing as much free cash at the past town meeting. And just went into, I call it the magic number last night that I'll keep going over. When we say 4% or 8% for our financial policy goals, it's off of what we call the general fund operating budget or the general fund revenues budget. So for free cash, we calculate the target amount of free cash that we like to have 4% off of the general fund operating budget.
Hey,
So for
Steph.
FY, yep.
Just for the benefit, because, you know, this group has probably heard you say this before, but just as a refresher, the definition of free cash, right? Because we know people kind of get tied up with free cash flow, and what does that free cash actually mean?
So free cash is, I try to describe it as the town's retained earnings. So at the end of each year, the Department of Revenue certifies our free cash. It's anything left over after we close out the fiscal year. So any overages from our operating budget, any excess revenue that has come in, such as local receipts, over what we anticipated with our budget. So it's everything closed out at the end of the year. It's a number that we're certified at. It's not a bucket of money. It's not free cash flow. That's a different term. It's just really stating what the town's retained earnings are. So we cannot move forward with our budget process as far as allocating any of that free cash until the number is certified, which just happened in, I think it was September. So, and this is the number, when we say it's certified at 11 million, that is the number we use going forward during our budget process. So we already know off the bat that we utilize some of that for our FinCom reserve. We allocate towards our stabilization fund at town meeting. We also set aside funds for what we call our base capital for school municipal, and then just anticipated additional capital articles. Does that sort of answer your question, Rob?
Yes, I just think it's a good level set for the group. Thank you.
Okay. So for FY24, that approximate amount that we like to keep as a target balance, I guess you could say, is $4 million. So as you can see, it was certified at 11 million, which seems like we have all this excess revenue to sort of spend. But keeping in mind that we already have things that we know have to set aside for the upcoming town meetings. And as Rob said, part of that at the special town meeting is we'll be asking the town to authorize using some of this free cash for the Fire Station 1 design and bid documents to go along with the ARPA funds that the select board approved last night. And then I just sort of went through our other reserves in the town. When we talk about our financial policies, there's this big target number of 8%. So we always say that the town shall maintain reserve accounts at a minimum of 8% of the general fund operating revenues. And I called it this magic number. That's what I'll keep calling it from now on. About $105 million for FY24 is our general fund operating revenues net of debt service. So that target amount for FY24 is 8.4 million. 4% of that is what I just referenced in free cash. And then the other 4% we like to set aside in our stabilization fund, which is really the town's main account that we keep for unanticipated or unforeseen emergency cases. It's also a key component of why we have the town's AAA credit rating that we do right now. So for FY24 in the stabilization fund, that's 4.2 million. The current balance in that account is 3.9. So we're almost at our target, and we plan to allocate another 125,000 into that of free cash at this year's town meeting, annual town meeting. And then the capital improvement stabilization fund. The last time we don't currently allocate anything annually towards that at town meeting. The last time we did that was in FY18, and the current balance of that is 1.5 million. And then I'm sure you're aware we have a meals and hotel tax account that was set up in 2017 by the town meeting, and that is to set aside any local revenue that comes in from meals and hotel tax. It's not used to supplement our ongoing operating budget. It's really set aside for special one-time capital projects. And as of September 30th, the balance in that account is 1.3 million.
And that's a really important factor in terms of not using that for operating budgets, because as we saw during COVID, when that, went through the floor, as nobody was dining out, nobody was staying in hotels, that would have left us in a real hole where other communities have used that to help fund operating budgets. We do not. We use it as one time because it's not nearly as reliable as your general tax base.
Correct. And it was also very helpful at this most recent town meeting because we were able to utilize 1.1 million of that after the funds had sort of built back up after COVID, which also allowed our free cash to build up a little higher than usual. Because we didn't have to
Stephanie,
use...
can I just interject for a second?
Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that looking at the stabilization fund at a target at 4.2 and the current balance at 3.9, and I'm sure people are thinking about this, but it just looks to me like there's possibly an opportunity to get to that 4.2 million this year by making a $300,000 allocation instead of the 125. It may be a unique opportunity. So
No,
I
it's
just
a good
wanted to
note. And this
suggest that.
is, no, that's a great note. And it's exactly what sort of we'll talk about as we go through this budget season.
Great.
Getting towards the next couple months in front of the select board as we see what we're allocating for free cash where.
And I just want to also make sure that we're maintaining sort of the proper purview, right? This group is, put together to talk about things on a long range basis. Really, FinCom and the town staff and the select board and school committee are all shaping the upcoming budget year, and FinCom will vet that as part of their process. But this is all important background for everyone to have, so that as we think about things on a long-term basis, you understand the various levers and buckets. So I just want to just put that out there.
Great. So while we have all these accounts, we always say that tax revenue is really where we get most of our operating budget funds and our revenues from. It's 80% of our revenue. And as I've said multiple times before, while it's 80% of our revenues, it is limited by what we call Proposition 2.5. So that limits what the town can raise in taxes. We can only increase 2.5% of the previous year's tax levy plus any new growth. So, and again, that's not calculated on an individual tax bill. It's the overall amount that the town can levy in taxes. So that, while that limits our year-to-year growth of our operating budget, because taxes are the main source of revenue and we're limited by that 2.5 increase, there is an option. Town meeting can approve a debt exclusion, we call it. So that allows for additional property taxes to be leveled in order to fund a certain project. And there are two, I'll call them types of overrides that town meeting can choose to utilize if that is the case. A general override, which is additional funds for any purpose, and it permanently increases the tax levy. The last time the town did that was in 2007. That hasn't had to happen for a while. The other option, which we have done recently, is a tax exemption. That was for the elementary school project. That's really utilized to pay for specific capital projects, and the annual debt service is added to the tax levy, but it's not permanent, and those taxes end when the bond ends, which for the school project is 30 years, just as an example. I'm not going to go into great detail on this.
Yeah, I think that you can skip
over.
probably
Perfect.
this one. If anybody wants to go through each slide, Stephanie did an outstanding job at last night's select board meeting. She is intending to cover a lot of this tomorrow with the FinCom. I want to have us get to some of the stuff that is really the purview of this group.
Right. So, and if anyone, I'm going to be talking about, I think the things I want to highlight definition wise is I'm going to be talking about exempt debt a lot and non-exempt. So exempt is when we talk about debt that is through a debt exclusion that's added to the levy limit, and non-exempt debt is what we call anything we've borrowed for that we are funding within our annual operating budget within Prop 2.5. So those non-exempt debt has not been levied above the tax rate outside of Prop 2.5. Exempt debt has. And just the only thing I'll highlight on this page is my little note about how the town has capacity limits, which prevent us from using debt to finance all the capital projects we want to, which is what this group talks about a lot. Should I go into this, Rob?
Yeah, I think this is helpful.
Okay, so I was trying to categorize, because we do get this question a lot, right? What is the town's capacity for debt? How do we fund all the projects we want to do? So I was sort of trying to come up with a clear way of describing how the town's debt capacity is really governed by, I'm calling them 4 factors that all really need to be considered when we're discussing the town's borrowing options. So the big one is that the amount of debt a government can incur is limited by Mass General Law. I won't get into this in too much detail, but that equates to 5% of the town's equalized valuation, which for the current, most current fiscal year would be $274 million for the town. So that would mean that at any point in time, we would be authorized to have outstanding debt equal to 274 million. I'll show you the current number later, but we are nowhere near that right now, and I don't foresee us ever really getting there.
I don't think our own town policies would ever allow us to come near that.
Exactly. So that's the legal limit, right, in Massachusetts. However, we have come up with town policies, as Rob just said, that really focus on the town and how we want to operate financially and how we want to be prudent in our debt policies. So for non-exempt debt, that limit is it should not exceed 8% of net general fund revenue. And as I said, that's that magic $105 million. So for FY24, that amount is 8.4 million. So that's non-exempt debt, meaning everything within our current operating budget that would not require a debt exclusion. Total debt, meaning exempt and non-exempt, should not exceed the cap of 12% of net general fund revenues. For FY24, that amount is 12.6 million. But a big part of that is that we need to balance the debt costs and the tax implications, right? With every other service that is going on in what I call the bucket of money. And that's where the budget comes in. So we have an annual budget for our non-exempt debt, and we try to keep it level year to year, because if that ever had to spike, it would put a lot of stress on the operating budget because of that one bucket of money we have. So operating funds have to be levied out to different departments. We have to provide our regular services in the town. So non-exempt debt does not have a dedicated tax revenue service like exempt debt does. So we need to balance that with the other needs of the town. And then obviously a big one is tax impact on taxpayers, right? So projects funded with long-term debt that are exempted from Prop 2.5, we really need to identify the impact on the annual tax rate and tax bill due to any kind of debt exclusion. This is just a graph.
This one really just highlights what you just said in terms of, you know, our financial policy cap of 8% versus what we plan and actually utilize at 3% or 3.3 million. You know, if we were to borrow to fund other projects up to that 8.4, that's what Stephanie's saying. It puts a tremendous amount of pressure on the rest of the operating budget. The pie is the pie as defined and fixed by Prop 2.5 plus new growth. So we do a really, you know, the town does a really good job of maintaining that 3.3% goal so that we're not having to then put pressure on other services. Right? There's only but so much money to go around. So
exactly. And 2 notes on that is that the way we keep it sort of level year to year is that we try to strategically bring on new debt as old debt rolls off. So when those payments are dropping, we try to bring on new project payments. And, you know, when we say projects, you might think of large buildings, but a lot of this also includes what we call our ongoing capital equipment needs. So if the DPW needs a large piece of equipment, the fire department needs a large piece of equipment, we borrow, and it is included in this non-exempt budget.
Stephanie, can you translate what the 3.3 million is in terms of total borrowing at this point? So that's the annual debt payment, but it's on how much millions of dollars of borrowings?
Yes, of course. And I'll show you that later, but right now.
Okay, you can wait.
No. For FY24, it's a great question. Our payment that we will be making on all outstanding debt is 3.3 million for our non-exempt, and for our exempt, it's 4.3, I believe. It's a total of about 7.7. In total outstanding debt that we have right now is, I want to say it was either 86 million or 83 million. It's
I
on
think
that-
it was
it's on-
83. You get to
yeah.
it in another couple slides.
Yep.
Okay, let's look at it then. Thank you.
And just going off of what Rob just brought up too, this sort of highlights what I was saying, that we've been pretty level in that amount. And this is the yearly debt service payments, right? So this is, you can think of like the budget each year, what we pay towards non-exempt debt. And the last time that sort of was able to jump and have that increase was when we had new growth coming from University Station. And the town strategically utilized that new growth revenue that came in to fund the police station and the fire station constructions, right? So those bonds sort of utilized that new capacity that was coming in from new growth. And then since then, we've just sort of been keeping this level by taking on new debt as old debt drops off. An example of that is a DPW road bond that ended in FY22 as the last payment. So we issued a new road bond, and the new payment for that came on in FY24. So just an example of how we try to utilize doing that. This is the debt, as Nancy was just saying, you know, what do we have for payments? This is the exempt debt payment for FY24. As you can see, there was a jump. I would say probably the most recent large project that was done exempt before the school, the elementary school, was the high school. As you can see, that was coming to an end, and the last payment was done in FY23. So there's a natural decline just because that bond, how the payments work, there's a natural decline in debt. And the last payment was made in FY23. So the town strategically was able to do the bonding for the elementary school project, whereas the first payment would hit in FY24. It didn't absorb all of the impact, but it does absorb some of the impact on the taxpayers by bringing on that new debt as the high school debt rolled off.
And importantly, if you were to take this chart back out to the left to say 1995, you would have seen a similar stable and declining exempt debt schedule. And then when we brought the high school on, proportionally speaking, it would have had a similar jump.
Right, exactly.
These big building projects they do have an impact.
Yes. And then we try to refinance as much as possible when that opportunity comes up. The town did a great job of doing that in April of 2021 with the library, and they were able to save about $75,000 per year in the remaining life of the bond, which is less that has to be levied on the taxpayers. So I'm not going to make you all look at this, but this is just sort of highlighting. This is when I say that we annually update our debt service schedule. This is what I mean. So it's all the fiscal years and all the payments we have for all the projects, and then the total outstanding. The main thing to highlight here is just really to focus on these boxes. I highlighted them to show that this is when a project is ending, a bond is ending, sorry, and the payments are rolling off. So just as an example right here, there's this land purchase. The payments are going down and getting smaller and smaller, and then they will end in FY26. So there'll be new capacity freeing up in FY27 because that's rolling off. To answer Nancy's question earlier, this is a chart of our current long-term outstanding debt. And this is everything that's been authorized and issued. So all the projects, and this is the amount that has currently been issued in debt long-term. It's about $84 million. And then down here is the sewer as well. So this is our general fund and sewer. And just important to note, obviously, the bond was issued for the elementary school in FY23, which is the reason that, you know, for the past 5 or 6 fiscal years, it's been between, that number has been between $35, $45 million. We now see a jump just because we're bringing on that new large amount of debt. And this just highlights sort of, as you can see, throughout the years, it'll be declining. Then we might bring on a new project, declining, bring on a new project. This is the highest it's been in a while, but obviously because of the new project we're doing.
And you can see, go back to that real quick, you can see actually that illustrates the point I made earlier about the proportional jump in FY03, FY02, things were basically declining at a similar rate. And then you had, a high school come on and, sort of relative height of that bar to its predecessors is comparable to the relative height of where things are now that we've brought the Pine Hill School debt onto the rolls.
Exactly. And just to keep in mind also, that's outstanding and issued. We also have debt that has been authorized at the few previous town meetings that has not been issued long-term. So I won't get too much into that, but just to keep in mind that there are projects, the cemetery expansion, the fire ladder truck, the rest of the elementary school bond that needs to be borrowed for, less any MSBA reimbursement. And then 3 design projects that we issued a short-term ban for that still need to go out long-term. So that's
So-
everything we have issued, but then,
The net of this relative to what the expected reimbursement is, if this is roughly around 30, when you take that 28 plus the 1.2 and you say, 16 and a half coming down. So it's about 15.5.
yeah, I would say between 12 and 15. That's what
Okay.
we're anticipating. Yep, correct. And so I guess this is the main slide last night that I was trying to work my way up to. So what does that all mean, right? As far as capacity. So again, all of that rolling off debt frees up capacity. And then the natural decline kind of adds that a little bit too. So we bring on new payments to anticipate it filling that drop that is happening. So here's a highlight of the next 6 fiscal years with any drops that are happening in the current budget. So this is current budget, does not include anything that might pop up or be approved at town meetings along the way. And it's assuming that the debt service budget stays the same, right? So there's a pretty significant one in FY25 because the first year of the elementary school bond payment is higher and then it drops down a bit. And then there's a few pretty significant projects dropping off within our non-exempt budget as well. However, I already know that we will have to borrow long-term for a few projects that have already been approved. So that capacity is pretty much, as you can see in the notes here, spoken for. So there's not actually going to be that much capacity in FY25. And then moving forward, as you can see, there's, a decent amount in FY27, but other than that, it's really not that much. The next significant drop for exempt debt is the library in 2031. And then for non-exempt debt, it's the Islington Fire Station in 2035. And we do have a road bond ending in 2032, but as I highlighted previously, that will just be filled by a new road bond that would be coming on. And then sort of coming to what does this mean and what could this fund? I'm trying to, and this is generalized, these are a lot of assumptions going on of 5% interest rate if it was a 30-year term level debt service. What could we fund project-wise with each of this $100,000 in new capacity? And that would get us approximately a $1.5 million bond, right? So it wouldn't be able to build a building on it, but it's just maybe a new piece of equipment or a small project. So that's sort of what that gets us. Anything you want to highlight on here, Rob, before I go to the?
No, I think that
Honest.
the next slides sort of get at the essence of what this group is probably most interested in, and will be important to have in mind as we then get the results of the facility study.
Exactly. Yep. Okay, so the purpose of this slide, and then also the next couple of ones, is to show what our current capacity is based on our policies that have gone through related to debt and what it would look like in different scenarios of different capital projects coming on. So the green shaded area is our current operating budget number. And then we assume a 3% projected growth annually. The bars down here make up our total current debt service numbers. The blue is non-exempt, the purple is exempt. And then with that goes the purple line up here shows our total debt ceiling of 12%, that 12% number we were talking about. And the blue line is just for non-exempt debt ceiling of that 8% we were talking about, right? And as you can see, obviously, since their percentages based off of the number for our operating budget, they grow as our projected operating budget grows. So the lines go up as we projected growth in our budget of 3%. The debt, however, naturally, as I was saying, sort of declines and some things might drop off, payments get lower. So everything right now, as you can see, is pretty much, it's within our policy, it is. So the non-exempt debt is within that blue line. The total is within that purple line. But then sort of what happens as we bring on new projects, right? So just to try to show this graphically and visually what I was just discussing. So say we brought on a project at $40 million with the first payment being in FY26. That's the blue part, right? So it just shows now our total new debt service that we'd be doing and how it sort of adds on, and it's up to the 8%. It's still within our 12% cap, but it's getting closer. It doesn't, and that all depends, all these projects are whether we would do it within our non-exempt current budget or it would be a debt exclusion, right? What if we brought on a second project, say $70 million in FY29? It's jumping up, it's getting closer to that cap, it's still within it. If we brought on a third project.
Excuse me, Steph, real quick.
Yep.
I think Maya lost her connection. Tish, can you let her back in, please? Go ahead.
Sorry. If we brought on a third project, again, it's within, it's just maybe getting closer. We'd have to determine whether each one of these are a debt exclusion or within, and then a fourth project. So this is just sort of showing graphically if what happens when we bring on new projects, and even if they're staggered, right, like 3 or 4 years in between them, because most of these projects would be 30-year terms, it will grow on top of each other.
And I think the other thing that this highlights, and it was sort of illustrated on an earlier chart, was is the importance of new growth, right? The only thing that can really change the height of the two lines is if we have significant new growth, as we did when we brought on University Station. That would, elevate the budget level as well as where the caps would be, freeing up capacity. So I think this was one of the very first questions that we asked when we got together. And I think Stephanie's done an outstanding job of putting this together in a very visual way that helps, sort of level set the understanding of what our capacity is and what, and how we need to be really mindful in planning those things. So I know this has been a lot for 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, but I want to open it up for questions to the group, because obviously one of our next steps is getting the facility study done. And that will be an important input to our future conversations. But based on everything that Stephanie has just presented, I want to open it up for questions from anyone on this committee. And if there are no questions, Stephanie, you clearly did a very good job.
Or everyone's asleep, everyone.
I just want to comment I want to echo what Rob said. That is an amazing slide to be able to get all that information in a pictorial kind of way. It does, Rob nailed the point. It does speak to the need for new growth. We don't have the same kind of opportunity that existed with University Station, but there is still land on University Avenue owned by private parties, and there are pockets of opportunity. So, obviously for the police station and Islington Fire Station, growth helped us do those things, and that was a great opportunity then, and we have to see how we can create new opportunities.
And I want to thank Rob. He went back and forth with me on these slides. So thank you, Rob, for helping with all this.
It's just, having a simple picture to increase the collective understanding makes conversations possible, right? So that's part of why this group was reformed. That's why, you know, that slide in particular helps the overall understanding as we have conversations going forward. So if there are.
I just did want to, I actually wanted to say one thing. I don't think that it's necessarily people sleeping or, being bored with this presentation. I think for those of us who aren't in the weeds on this, I mean, Nancy, obviously, you know all this stuff because you did it for years. But I think it's a lot to digest. So I actually do have some questions that I'm going to table. And Rob, if you and I can talk, I think some of the way that this is presented to the average resident looks like a lot of spending, and which I think it's great. We want the town, we want to have safe buildings, but we also want to be mindful of the tax implications for the average person. So I do have some questions. Rob, I'll just clarifying questions.
Yeah, sure.
that
And I think that, it's as we get into that, if there are questions that others have, right, that's part of the benefit of this group, is being able to have those conversations and ask those clarifying questions so that residents can understand, right? So, this is a very similar question that we asked in our initial meeting. To have a slide like this was something that was asked at the last FinCom meeting by one of the members, also seeking to understand, right? So I think, yes, it looks like a lot, and part of that, as Stephanie showed, the 4 bullets and the 4 factors that sort of govern how much we can actually do, is the point you're making, Paula, about we also have to be mindful of the taxpayer, right? Because there are any number of folks who have lived in town their entire lives and, or have been here for 30 years plus and are now retired. And, when you start to layer on all of that additional spending, that takes a material chunk out of their, fixed income on a regular basis. So I see Maya has her hand raised.
Just quick to follow up on Paula's point. Is it possible to get these slides, at least just the ones we talked about, emailed to us so we can sort of review them again and digest them and come up with questions?
Absolutely. I believe that these slides are already up on the town website from last night's select board meeting, but we can get somebody to email them to the group so that you have Stephanie's presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Phil, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, very nice job, Stephanie. Thank you. So I think one of the things that this highlights, and these types of presentations highlight, is that there is, we've got long range in our name, and is that, we have to make these decisions almost not quite generational basis, but we've got to look at sort of a long-term capacity, and also the competition to some degree that this has with operating opportunities and demands, and trying to do things within 2.5 rather than adding to people's burdens, as Rob was talking about, is a pretty important thing. But it means we've really got to look at this through a lens that's at least 10 or 15 years long, which means, there are going to be some needs that people would like to fill sooner that won't get filled until later.
And I think, Phil, I think one of the things that you're highlighting is the need for us to talk about this as a total community, right? So those of us who had students who went through the new high school, that was in large part thanks to those who had come before. And there are going to be those who are supporting the new school that, again, are paying it forward for the next generation. So I think that's part of the collective conversation that we need to have. Skip, I see you have your hand raised. But hold on, before you go, Skip, Phil, were you done? Did I
Yeah,
kind of cut you off a little bit? Okay,
No, it's fine.
Skip.
Excuse me. Um, With that debt chart, how much does it add to the tax rate? Is there any way you can show that?
Those are, so I think Stephanie has shown in the past, and maybe still, I don't know if you have something handy that you can pull up to say, what did the current school add? The other.
I've done it for an example, $40 million project recently. I don't know if you want me to show that or.
Yeah, why
I think-
not? I mean, so Skip, that would have been the first additional bar on top of the current exempt and current non-exempt debt. So that light blue, actually, if you wouldn't mind.
So this is what that first project, as Rob just said, a $40 million bond if we issued it for 30 years, level debt service at 5% interest rate. The total cost for the whole project over the 30 years would be 78 million. The annual debt service cost that would be added to when I talk about that 4.3 number that is for FY24 for exempt debt, it would add $2.6 million for that if it was a debt exclusion. The cost per $100,000 of home value to the average resident would be $41 a year. And then just equating that to the most recent number, and I know we don't have our FY24 numbers yet from DOR, but for FY23, the average home value was $927,000. So what that would look like for their tax bill at that time of $13,270, it would add an annual cost of $382 to the tax bill. And then just down here is sort of the range of assessed home values, their FY23 tax bill, and how much the annual increase would be for that project. Does that answer, Skip, sort of what you're
Yeah,
looking
so
for?
that's for 40 million.
Yes.
Yes.
So help me with my long division. How much is that per million?
Let's see here.
$410.
There you go.
Well, $410 per million of valuation of the house.
Correct.
And
Per
So-
million of the project, you mean?
And for each $1 million we borrow, how much does it impact an average homeowner?
Yeah, I can do that really quick, I think.
about $9.
Thank you, Phil. This is why I love having Phil here.
$9.50, right?
Keep the change.
Thank you, Steph.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from anyone?
The number we don't talk about is that's 10 grand for over the 30-year life of the bond. Talk about the 382, but 382 times 30 is over $10,000. So
And
It's,
that's with the current tax bill, right? That doesn't mean that's as if everything's level for the 30 years. So yes.
right. So that's meaningful. The 382 may be, a few gift cards, but the 10 grand, that's impactful for people who are on a fixed income or at the lower end of the income scale.
Yep. And that's why I think we need to be really, as we think about all of these things going forward, we need to be both mindful of those impacts and creative in our approach to solving some of these problems. Tim, you have your hand raised.
Sure, thank you. So the one thing I just wanted to add to this conversation, right? We're talking a lot about what the cost of action is. I think what Phil's previous comment about thinking almost generationally, this committee also needs to consider the cost of inaction. Generally, construction costs inflate at a value greater than general inflation. And so when we think about this, we need to think about, if we don't do a project now, what's the cost going to be 10, 15 years down the road, which may not impact some people who may not be in the community anymore at that point in time, but it will have a generational impact. So I think just as we look at the long range planning, we need to look at both of those factors.
I would actually add to that. That's a very good point, Tim. And I would add to that to say that the cost of inaction on a new build often comes with some fairly significant maintenance bills to just keep things up with current code, right? So there's opportunity cost there as well. So I think these are excellent points. I think our next big milestone will be once we have that study back and we start to get a greater understanding of the scope of the needs as well as the urgency of the needs, because all of that also factors into timing, slating, when things would go in. And I think, I'm encouraged by the composition of this group, the thoughtfulness of the questions that get asked. And I want to make sure that we are provided with the right data to have the right conversation. So with that, if there are no further questions or comments, I want to jump. Oh, Skip.
Let me just offer a wild card thought. Is there any way you could pick a number? Somebody who's been in town 30, 40 years, you could freeze their taxes?
I don't know what the impact of that would be or what the qualifications of that would be, but so
Rob, would you like me to take a stab at that?
sure, Pat.
Yeah, so there's been many communities, including ours a long time ago, that tried to, when we did the high school, tried to take the impact on people 65 and over out of their tax bill. We couldn't even get out of committee on a home rule petition to do that. There have been some communities that have had somewhat limited success on trying to isolate seniors' impact on overrides. But generally, the legislature doesn't like special taxation situations like that. So the answer is not really.
Thank you, Pat. Very helpful context. Okay.
But Pat, we do have things like the aid to the elderly and other things that we do, right? So if people
That's
are
correct.
struggling,
We
and I
have-
would say that to everyone when you're looking at, if you find yourself in need, there are lots of resources in town, the community chest, the food pantry, lots of things that we should be helping with. And also we should be letting people know about. And I don't want to go on a soapbox, but.
There's no question about that. We have a number of opportunities for people to abate their taxes. Nancy probably can talk to that with far greater detail than I. We have the aid to the elderly. We have a work-off program. So we're a community that I think has been very sympathetic to people on fixed income as much as the general law allows us to be. So, it is what it is for the most part.
Okay.
Yeah. There are those aids. It's nothing like what Skip is asking about, though, that would really buffer or, put a group of people away from the tax impact of large projects that we just haven't been able to succeed at that level.
So I think at this point, what I want to do is take a temperature on the group as to the need for a December meeting as we head into holiday period. And really, there's not as much to talk about until we get back with having that study in place. I would like to propose not having a December meeting, but waiting until January after special town meeting. And at that meeting, I would anticipate we could get an update from Chris and Tim with respect to the process of getting the consultants on board to do that facility study, as well as it might be an opportunity to talk about the other side of the ledger and some of the things that are happening on the revenue side and some of the projects and parcels that are in process of being redeveloped. So,
Rob?
yes,
Might it be good to have Nora come in at some point, Nora Lucknane? And
she's here right now. And I was thinking that was my
Where are
very
you, Nora?
thought with respect to the January.
oh, there you are. Yeah. Hi,
So-
Nora. I'm sorry. There are too many boxes, but that kind of
problem.
discussion is her wheelhouse. Yeah.
I'm happy to give you an update on where things stand.
Yeah, I think let's in the interest of time for everybody to get to their busy work days, I would say let's table that till the January discussion. The slides will be emailed to the group. If anyone has questions, by all means, feel free to reach out to Stephanie or to me. Happy to have further conversations with respect to that. So there's a question from Paula with respect to, is there anything we need to do prior to the special town meeting? And that's where my comment earlier was making sure that we're sort of maintaining our lane, right? So I view sort of the review of the warrant articles for special town meeting as the purview of FinCom, right? And we're looking at this on a longer term basis. So I don't really see anything that we would need to be talking about with respect to special town meeting. You understand from prior presentations the need, you understand the math based on some of what Stephanie has talked about. Your presence on this committee means you may get questions from folks, and by all means, feel free to share what you know. But I don't know that there's any burning need for us to get together in December. I think we can probably take a pause for a month, come back together in January, hear from Nora on the revenue side, and hear from Chris and Tim as to where we stand on getting the facilities study. Does anybody have any issue with taking the month of December off?
No, but Rob, I want to say, I think there is a headline regarding the special town meeting and as it relates to the fire station. And that is, we can do this and it will not have an incremental impact on anybody's tax bill. It's not going to cause a rise in your taxes because it's going to be funded with free cash. It's not a debt exemption to do it.
The design and bid documents will not have.
The special town meeting item.
Yes.
Right. There's
yes.
we don't have to go to the ballot to do a debt exemption outside of Prop 2.5.
Yes.
We can fund it within our means.
I just
We
want to
just
make
need
sure
the
that
authorization.
the collective understanding of that is the money necessary to do the design and bid documents as opposed to the
Not the
actual
project,
project
no.
itself. Yes.
I refer to special town meeting, so it's that particular article. There isn't going to be an impact on our wallets,
Correct.
other than what we already pay all the time.
So looking ahead, the special town meeting, I believe, is January 17th. Am I correct, Chris?
That's correct.
Thank you, Stephanie. Chris is in the car, so I
Yes, that is
apologize.
correct.
That's all right. So I would suggest that we look to the first Tuesday after the 17th, which I believe is the 23rd of January. Is that right? So by show of hands in the attendee list, the panelist list, can you raise your hand if that date works for you? 8 o'clock in the morning on the 23rd of January. It looks like it is coming up for most folks. Bill, Dan, Paula, yeah. All right, it looks like we have a quorum of people available for that day. So let's plan our next meeting for January 23rd, 8 a.m. via Zoom. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Wait, Rob, can we approve minutes?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. Thank you. Thank you, Tish. Before we second Nancy's motion, did everyone have an opportunity to read the minutes? Okay. We had minutes from 3 meetings, and I would entertain a motion, a separate motion for each, please. Nancy Hyde, can I call on you to make a motion?
Yeah, I was just gonna, what's the date of the first one? Tish?
February 6th, 2023.
Okay, I move that we approve the minutes from February 26th,
February
20.
6th, 06.
February 6th, 2023.
Second,
Okay. Roll call vote. Julie Bride,
Yes.
Nancy Hyde,
Yes.
Nancy James,
Yes.
Paula McLaughlin.
Just a quick question. I wasn't part of it in February.
Okay.
Should I
so
recuse myself or?
you can abstain from this vote.
That's
Okay.
right.
Chris Paff,
Yes.
Maya Plotkin,
Yes.
Phil Shapiro,
Yes,
Dan Weller, you were not part of it, so I imagine you'll abstain as well.
Correct.
And Skip Wells.
same,
And I vote aye as well on the February 6th. The next meeting is the June 13th, 2023 meeting.
I move approval of those minutes.
Okay, can I get a second?
second,
Thank you. Roll call, Julie Bride,
Yes.
Nancy Hyde,
Yes.
Nancy James,
Yes.
Paula McLaughlin,
Abstain.
okay, Chris Paff,
Yes.
Maya Plotkin,
Yes.
Phil Shapiro,
yes,
and Skip Wells.
yes,
And then the third is from July 11th, 2023.
I move approval of those minutes.
second,
All right. Julie Bride,
Yes.
Nancy Hyde,
Yes.
Nancy James,
Yes.
Paula McLaughlin.
I still think I wasn't here yet.
That's fine. I think you and Dan came on in what, September?
August, because I was in Maine.
Right, that's right. Okay.
I was at the July meeting.
Okay. So we are up to Chris Paff,
Yes.
Maya Plotkin,
Yes.
Phil Shapiro,
yes,
Dan Weller,
Yes.
and Skip Wells.
yes,
Okay, thank you. And I vote yes on each of those as well. That brings us to the aforementioned motion to adjourn by Nancy James. Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay. Last roll call vote, Julie,
Yes.
Nancy Hyde,
Yes.
Nancy James,
Yes.
Paula McLaughlin. You can vote on this one.
Yes.
Chris Paff,
Yes.
Maya Plotkin,
Yes.
Phil Shapiro,
yes.
Dan Weller,
Yes.
Skip Wells,
yes.
and I vote yes as well. Thank you all for, as always, a very thoughtful discussion this morning. And as we said, we will get you the rest of the presentation. And should anyone have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You don't need to wait till the next meeting. And if there's things that get brought up in the interim that the rest of the group would benefit, we'll revisit those come our next meeting. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thanks, Stephanie. That was
Thank
great.
you.